Okie dokie, everybody. I believe we are live. We are back in action.
Wow, that's amazing.
Are you excited?
I'm really excited. I love action.
You love action.
Yeah.
I'm Sam Lichtman. My father here, distinguished professor of history at American University, Allan Lichtman. Say what up to the people.
Hey, folks, welcome back. We're here. We're ready to take all your questions.
All your questions, all your concerns. There's a lot of questions out there for you.
Yeah, but don't ask me about the opera, and then we'll be happy.
Okay, no opera, but everything else is on the table?
Yes.
Okay, everything else is on the table, but no opera. All right, so the tagline, the title of today's video is, Can any GOP hopeful beat Trump? Go.
The answer is no.
Really?
Yes. What is Trump most famous for saying? I could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and I wouldn't lose any support.
Right.
Well, he hasn't shot anyone on Fifth Avenue.
Right.
But he's been charged with over 70 felony counts, cumulatively probably hundreds of years in prison. He's not going to get that, but if you added up all the sentences, he was found by a civil jury to have sexually abused journalist E. Jean Carroll and hurt her and then defamed her. And then what did he do after the verdict? He defamed her again, and she asked for another $5 million. Of course, he's famous for having bragged in the Access Hollywood tape.
Look in the camera.
In the camera.
You're looking at the floor or something right now.
Okay.
Look at the camera.
The camera, for bragging about sexually assaulting women, then was found guilty of doing that. Trump Organization was found in a criminal case to be operating a criminal operation, fined the maximum allowed under New York law. He was, of course, twice impeached, and he's guilty of the biggest lie in the history of the country.
Which is?
That he actually won the 2020 election.
Right.
Even though scores of judges, including some appointed by Trump himself, including 3 Supreme Court justices he's appointed, rejected all claims, and usually scathingly, that the election was stolen from him. So he's withstood all this, and he is still way ahead in the polls. And
in fact,
no one seems to be catching him.
I believe DeSantis is sinking pretty quickly.
DeSantis is an abysmal candidate.
Abysmal. You're
Abysmal.
You're going all the way to abysmal.
Yes. Imagine Donald Trump without the charm, and you got Ron DeSantis. He's got all of Trump's faults and none of Trump's appeal.
Okay.
That doesn't exactly make an effective candidate, does it?
No. A couple questions coming in here from Andrew. I know Andrew's a concurrent viewer, so thanks for tuning in, Andrew. He says, do you believe that if Trump loses to Biden, let's say in the regular election, do you think he's officially done in the Republican Party and running for elections, etc.?
Well, let's see. How many times would he have lost then? They lost the 2018 midterms.
Right.
Trump lost to Biden in 2020.
Right.
And the 2022 midterms, virtually every one of the election deniers that Trump endorsed lost. So he loses a 4th time. Usually you get 3 strikes, but he'll have 4 strikes. Plus, by the time the next presidential election rolls around, he'll be over 80 years old.
So
we know Joe Biden is that way, but look at the difference between what kind of shape the two men are in.
So go ahead.
Now, why doesn't Trump's base crack?
Good question.
I'll give you 2 answers.
Okay.
What people don't realize, and you probably don't even know this, and you know everything.
I probably know it.
In what context and where did Trump say I could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue when my base won't crack?
I don't know.
Nobody knows. It was an address in a small Christian university in Iowa, Dort, D-O-R-D-T, University. And what he said at that university, which got totally overshadowed by that one line, was even more important. He said, I am going to be a crusader for Christianity. I am going to restore Christianity for him in 2020, even though only 36% of all the rest of the electorate voted for him. And this despite him being a serial, adulterer, assaulting women, violating all their standards of morality. Here's what's going on for these conservative evangelicals and other in Trump space. They know he's a son of a bitch. They know he's a rotten person. They don't care because he is their son of a bitch. They want a bully.
You said the B word now twice. Just so you know.
No. They want a bully who's going to fight for him. Remember Joe McCarthy? You know who Joe McCarthy was?
Nope.
Joseph McCarthy was the senator in the 1950s responsible for the Great Red Scare. He was the senator who accused all kinds of innocent people of being communists and was finally disgraced and censured by the U.S. Senate. That's the key to Trump's appeal. He may be a rotten person, he may be a bully, but that's exactly what his base wants. They want someone who will fight for them no matter what tactics, how dirty they may be. They want their son of a bitch.
Okay, now you've said it like 4 or 5 times, the B word.
Does that mean we're being censored?
Maybe. All right. Jacob Antonero asks, what about Chris Christie?
Yesterday's news. A moderate like Chris Christie is going nowhere within the Republican Party. Here's another mistake that all the commentators make, and that is they pose Donald Trump against the so-called Republican mainstream. You heard about mainstream Republicans?
I've heard of it, yeah.
And supposedly Chris Christie is a mainstream Republican, right?
Right.
Wrong. Donald Trump is the mainstream. There isn't an alternative mainstream Republican that isn't for Donald Trump. Look at the way all the members of the House and the Senate line up behind him. He is the new mainstream. This notion that, Trump is violating Republican principles, he's out of the mainstream. No, that's entirely wrong. As one commentator said, if you think Trump is violating what the Republican Party stands for, and yet all the Republicans are supporting him, you better think again.
Oh, think again.
Think again.
Joshua D says, Allan's getting all the love, but Sam, you're awesome too. He said that about me.
Oh, wow.
That's pretty good, right?
That's pretty good. Maybe you can get your own show.
Edward Marks, I think you know Ed Marks.
I sure do.
He says, given that the
no relation to Groucho or to Carl.
Right. He says, given the Republican Party has given in to democracy, given that the Republican Party has given it on democracy, I guess given up on democracy.
Given up.
What do you see as a viable political? Do you see them as a viable political party? Will sanity return to it?
No, I don't see the Republican Party going in a different direction. As I said, Trump is now the mainstream.
Right.
Republicans, whether rank and file or leaders, have lined up behind him. My primary example is this sad sack, Lindsey Graham, who, in 2016 saw Trump exile Donald Trump's boots.
Sad sack. That's what you're going to call this poor man?
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's see. Anthony Michael Guitar says, I'm a huge fan. It's great to see your videos.
All right. Reach out.
Have you heard of
your friends.
Have you heard of Jad Sadiq? He says, thoughts on the website 13 Keys Tracker. It's an interactive tool based on your keys.
Nice. Have to look it up.
Oh, you don't even know what it is?
No.
Oh.
You know me. I'm an old dinosaur.
Okay. This is from John Jones. He says, hello, Professor. Why did
everyone knew about Osama bin Laden after 9/11? That's the difference.
Okay. That's a pretty good answer.
Could you have come up with his name?
Baghdadi. I know Baghdadi.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard of Baghdadi.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good question. Do you have any thoughts on Marjorie Taylor Greene being expelled from the Freedom Caucus?
I wasn't aware she was expelled from the Freedom Caucus.
I think it happened.
Is she that right wing enough or too nutty?
I don't know. I
don't know the answer to that.
I think it happened, a couple hours ago.
Yeah, I haven't seen that.
I don't think she was actually expelled, but people were talking about expelling
I'm not
her.
sure you can be expelled. I'm not sure how formal the Freedom Caucus really is. But I have to say, I don't know anything about it.
Okay, there's your answer. So Aaron wants to know straight up, is the Biden versus Trump rematch happening?
Most likely, yes. However, let me lay out a scenario for you. None of these Republicans are going to catch Donald Trump, no matter what, in the Republican primaries. But let's assume Donald Trump gets convicted of multiple felonies, including jeopardizing our national security. Don't call the case involving national security documents a documents case. It's a national security case. It's not even a classified documents case, because the charges have nothing to do with whether the documents are classified or not. They have to do with whether the documents pertain to national security and whether he's mishandled national security documents in a way that could compromise the security of the United States. And by the way, whether we know or not whether Trump showed them to foreign adversaries or showed them to foreign adversaries almost doesn't matter, because the American defense and national security community can't take the chance. They've got to assume all of those documents have been compromised and have to redo a lot of their operations. But let's assume Trump is convicted of some very serious felonies, including jeopardizing our national security, perhaps trying to overturn the election, and is sentenced to significant prison time. Is the Republican National Committee going to let him continue as the nominee? And I believe they have this power, or will they remove him as the nominee and put someone in place? That's the only way a DeSantis or a Pence or a Tim Scott could possibly become the Republican nominee. But by the way, of course, formally and legally, being convicted of a crime does not prevent you from running for president. You can run for president from jail. Eugene Victor Debs, the socialist candidate in 1920, ran from jail. And by the way, you know what he was jailed for? Violating the Espionage Act. And Trump's violation of the Espionage Act, allegedly anyway, in terms of what he's charged with, is infinitely more serious than what Debs was convicted for in jail. Debs was essentially convicted for criticizing World War I and criticizing the government, not for dealing with documents in a dangerous way that could jeopardize the national security of the country. So this is the only way any one of these also-rans could become the nominee. Or if, Trump is convicted of serious felonies, sentenced to prison, and he withdraws, which I think is not likely.
Now, we've been talking about the Republicans a lot. There are a few Democrats running in the primary, too.
Sort of Democrats.
Sort of Democrats.
Not sure they're really Democrats.
John Albertson asks, what chances do you think RFK Jr. has? Not RFK, to be precise.
No, RFK has zero chance,
right.
I'll tell you that.
Right.
RFK Jr.'s chances, I'll give it in 3 words: slim and none.
Okay, that's a pretty simple answer. Do you think Trump goes to prison anytime between now and the election?
I think it's unlikely he goes to prison. He could be sentenced to prison, but then he's going to appeal, and then you're going to be in the middle of a presidential campaign. It's possible. Look, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an expert on the criminal justice system. Thank goodness.
Right. I agree.
But I think that's unlikely.
Okay.
But he can run from jail like Debs did in 1920.
Right. This is a question that I got from Twitter. Can you please elaborate why you think the no military failure key isn't false with the Afghanistan withdrawal?
I'm not going to talk about the keys this evening piecemeal. We'll have another session when we'll talk about the keys. Let me say, though, generally, I haven't decided on many of the keys, including the foreign military failure key, because it all depends how it plays out in the election year. It's going to be pretty old news by...
Do you think the GOP will win the Senate in 24?
I think it's 50-50. We still haven't had the primaries. We don't know who the candidates are. We don't know what the circumstances of 2024 will be. I think to a great extent it will depend on who wins the presidential election. Doesn't always follow, but to an extent, lower ticket elections follow the trend of the top of the ticket, which is the presidential election.
Interesting. Let's see if we have any more questions. Are any of the scandals facing Biden potentially a scare in the keys?
Not yet. I mean, Republicans have been talking about implicating Biden in some kind of bribery scheme in Ukraine for years, literally for years, and have yet to come up with anything at all. It's, so far total hot air. Incredibly loyal political ally, his attorney general, his Justice Department looked into, these allocations about Joe Biden and came up empty, which is why Donald Trump went to the then newly elected president of Ukraine, President Vladimir Zelensky, and tried to pressure him into investigating any conceivable wrongdoing of Joe Biden in Ukraine. Now, the decree was, it didn't matter whether Zelensky found anything, since no one had. All that Trump really wanted was the news that Ukraine had opened an investigation into Joe Biden. That would have been enough for, of course, Trump to say Joe Biden is, the criminal of the century.
You're the criminal of the century.
Probably so, but I haven't been caught yet.
Did Hunter Biden get a sweetheart deal?
Either an unregistered or a firearm without a permit. And Donald Trump should be cheering any kind of shenanigans with taxes, since he claims he is the master of shenanigans with taxes.
Right, that's a good point. He says, if it's in the books, he's going to do it,
Yeah, and, from what we've seen, even if it's not in the books, he might be doing it. There's a big trial coming up in October. It's not a criminal case, but it's a civil case in which Trump's financial finagling is being charged by the Attorney General of New York, and they're seeking to stop Trump from operating his businesses, which are registered in New York, and to pay a $250 million fine.
Can you pay a $250 million fine?
Absolutely not. There's no evidence that running mates have ever made a difference. I remember in 1988 when George H.W. Bush picked Dan Quayle as his running mate, and everyone threw him, oh my God, Dan Quayle is such a loser, he's so dumb, he's going to sink the ticket. And of course, George Bush defeated Michael Dukakis pretty handily. Dick Cheney, who was widely derided, right, as George W. Bush's running mate, did not sink the ticket either, although I might have a lot to say about the 2000 election, but we're not going to get into that right now. So there's no evidence a running mate makes a difference.
Interesting. A lot of people are asking Supreme Court questions.
Remember, I'm not a lawyer, so...
He's not a lawyer, and you don't really feel like answering those.
Not really, because I'm an expert witness, and my cases go to the Supreme Court.
Right. So we're not going to answer much on the Supreme Court stuff.
I might talk generically, but no, I'm not.
Do you want to say anything generically?
Well, what are the questions?
There's just a lot of what do you think about it? What do you think about the rulings, et cetera?
I'll say this. The conservative court was somewhat surprising. It's a very low bar, but they did, in fact, enforce the Voting Rights Act on congressional redistricting in Alabama and likely Louisiana, where Republicans, even though African Americans were substantial percentages of the population, created only one African American opportunity district when they easily could have created two and avoided doing that. And the Supreme Court said you can't do that. That was a pretty amazing result from the Supreme Court. And of course, predictably, you've seen, not a big surprise, Supreme Court striking down the student loan forgiveness, striking down affirmative action, and deciding that this person could refuse to, bake a wedding cake with certain words on it that by a LGBTQ couple that violated her religious convictions. These were entirely predictable outcomes. I find the LGBTQ decision particularly disturbing because, as an historian, I know religious convictions were a fundamental justification for slavery and a fundamental justification for the Jim Crow discrimination that followed slavery. Segregated schools, essentially all-white law enforcement, discrimination in employment, in housing, in healthcare. And when Jim Crow was attacked, defenders, not all, but some defenders of Jim Crow said, the Bible dictates the separation of the races.
What are your thoughts on the economy? People want to know what you're thinking about that.
About what?
The economy.
Oh, well, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an economist, but I have to say the economy has defied all of the predictions. Take the predictions of all of these economists and do to them what the great philosopher David Hume said you should do to works of superstition. Consign them to the flames, they're worthless. Good friend of mine, the late, great Jack Germond, political commentator, he called himself the fat man in the middle, had a great line. He said, there is an economist on every street corner in Washington, D.C., and not one of them agrees with any other.
Yeah, I've noticed that as well. They don't seem to, with all their models and all their data, they still seem to have different conclusions.
Yeah, and most of them are therefore going to be wrong.
Yeah.
And you never know which one is right and which one is wrong ahead of time.
Right. People are asking about Russia. We got a couple questions about Russia.
Yeah, I'm also not an expert in foreign policy, but this hasn't stopped me from answering all these questions anyway.
What are your thoughts? Some people are saying, is Russia going to fall into a civil war? Do you think Putin's in danger? What do you think is the greatest global danger that comes from Putin? We've got a lot of questions about Russia. Let him drink his soda real quick, guys.
Even the experts in Russia have no idea what's going to happen in Russia. It's entirely unpredictable. It's not like the U.S. It's not like Putin can be impeached and removed from office. It doesn't work that way. Putin is a dictator who rules by terror and disinformation. It's not going to be easy to dislodge Putin, short of what we thought we might be seeing last week, a coup by the mercenary Wagner Group forces. So I think a lot of the predictions about Putin's demise are at this point greatly exaggerated. In a sense, the most dangerous situation, at least for the world as opposed to the Russian people, would be instability. The lack of clear authority, clear lines of communication, because Russia has thousands of nuclear weapons. And you don't want a country with thousands of nuclear weapons being in an unstable and unpredictable situation.
That is all very true. Cornell West also running. Any threats from Cornell West?
Well, slightly.
Because he's a third-party candidate,
yeah,
too. Yeah.
I mean,
and the keys say
Cornell West is pretty articulate. He's African-American, so he might draw some African-American votes.
Right.
They're not going to come from Trump. I doubt if he'd reach the 5% threshold, but it's not impossible, but he's got to get in the ballot. I don't know if he's hooked up with the Green Party or some other established party, but it doesn't do that.
I think he's running in the Socialist Party or something.
Well, then
like
they
that.
probably do have ballot spots.
Yeah,
but
I think they do.
Running in the Socialist Party is probably not ideal for getting votes.
Yeah.
But it's not. Look, any third party, unless it's Donald Trump, an obvious split within the Republican Party, is bad for the party holding the White House, Biden and the Democrats. They don't want third parties.
Do you anticipate, I mean, we haven't really heard anything about it, but do you anticipate anybody else jumping in as a third party?
Well, possibly some outside chance. RFK Jr. may jump in as a third party. He certainly holds no loyalty to Joe Biden or the Democrats. And if somehow Donald Trump is deprived of the nomination, perhaps by the Republican National Committee, he's self-centered and egotistical enough to run a third party, something every Democrat would be praying for.
That would be quite interesting if Trump was running as a third party.
Not impossible.
Why do you think RFK is polling so high?
I have an answer to that. Okay. First of all, early polls mean nothing. It's way too early. Secondly, we know there's a lot of dissatisfaction within the Democratic Party with respect to Joe Biden. Not on policy, but, they think maybe he's too old. There's a danger he won't be able to fulfill a term or even can't pay it effectively. So I think RFK Jr. is kind of a placeholder for Democrats who are worried about Joe Biden.
Evan Butemire is tuning in. I think you know him.
I know him. I just saw him.
Say hello.
Hey, Evan.
He has a question for
Welcome.
you, too.
I bet it's a smart one.
What about the possibility of Joe Manchin running as a no-labels party? He said he read a couple articles that he could possibly run as a third-party candidate.
That would not be good for the Democrats at all. I have no idea whether he would do that. Manchin likes to talk up things. He likes to talk a big game and then often doesn't follow through. But that would be bad news for the Democrats because he does. Unlike RFK Jr., he's got a base and, he's got some clout among the conservative wing of the Democratic Party.
Right.
I knew Evan would ask me a smart question.
There you go. We've got somebody named Obama Soda. I'm not sure. Is that a joke about Obama? Have you heard of that? Obama Soda?
That's a new one, but it could be.
It could be.
Could be.
Interesting question, though. He says, Allan, I'm a little worried about Republicans impeaching Biden.
I'm not. It would be such an enormous overreach that I think, like the impeachment of Bill Clinton, it would backfire, at least in the short term, on the Republicans. Plus, they don't have the votes. They've only got a 5-vote majority in the House, and they're not going to get any Democratic votes, and that's just too thin a majority policy. Their policy mantra seems to be catastrophic climate change, killing the planet, no matter. 2 mass shootings a day in America, who cares? But what's really important and what we're really doing is stopping drag shows and keeping teachers from mentioning anything about sexual orientation.
You sound like a liberal.
Hey, I'm just telling it like it is.
Okay.
People brand me as a liberal, but when I ran for the Senate so many years ago, I had a more nuanced approach. I called myself a progressive with a strong libertarian streak. And I ran against the grain of the Democratic Party. So, my own position is not easily pigeonholed. But I am appalled by Republicans focusing on things that absolutely don't matter or are negative and ignoring the huge problems that face us, like catastrophic climate change and gun violence. Gun violence is now the biggest killer of our children, and all Republicans have to offer are thoughts and prayers, even though overwhelmingly the American people favor responsible gun controls, things like bans on assault weapons that nobody needs for self-defense and are just used for these mass killings, or expanded background checks, closing the gun show loophole. Even gun owners favor these things.
Is a blue Texas potentially possible in 24?
No, I would be really surprised. I've heard about got a lot of friends down in Texas, and I've heard about a blue Texas.
Name 4 friends you have in Texas.
Wendy, Davis.
Okay. That's okay. You can just answer the question. All right. So no blue Texas.
Jose Garza.
Okay, just answer the question. I'm joking.
I've heard for 20 years about a blue Texas, and it just hasn't happened. Every statewide elected official, every one of them, there are a lot of them because they elect the Court of Criminal Appeals and the Supreme Court are elected statewide. There's no Democrats who've been elected statewide. And Texas has been cracking down on Democratic cities like Dallas and Houston and making it more difficult for them to administer their own elections. So I don't see it.
Is Arizona and Georgia blue now?
They're purple. I think they're both up for grabs. I think absolutely the Democrats could win Georgia and Arizona in 2024, but I wouldn't call them, blue like Maryland.
Well, nobody's saying they're blue like Maryland.
Or blue like Colorado even.
Massachusetts.
Oh, Massachusetts is as blue as Maryland.
Is Massachusetts the bluest state?
Massachusetts, Hawaii, Maryland are probably. Massachusetts doesn't have a single Republican member of Congress.
Right.
I think it has 10 members.
Right.
Maryland has 1.
Right.
On the Eastern Shore.
So Obama Soda, the guy who we said, is that a joke? He said...
No, he asked a good question.
Right, but he said his username is a reference to how Trump mispronounces President Obama's name.
Ah, okay.
Did you know that?
It didn't occur to me.
Okay. Is John Tester guaranteed to lose re-election? Montana.
Is who
John Tester.
John Tester. He's got a very tough race in Montana. I will quote the great British Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli, who said, "Finality is not a word we use in politics." So I wouldn't say he's done yet, but don't bet your Montana horse ranch on his re-election.
Do you have one?
I don't, so I'm not betting.
Oh, so you're fine. What do you think about Mitch McConnell being more moderate, such as supporting the infrastructure bill and going to a groundbreaking with Biden?
Well, Mitch McConnell has always been about one thing and one thing only: power. He's really not particularly ideological, and he thinks supporting these things is good for him and good for the Republican Party. He doesn't want to keep going in the direction that Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis have led the party to, essentially 3 disappointing elections in a row since 2016.
Right.
We should be wrapping up.
Let's get a couple more questions in, and then we'll be wrapping up. Here's a good one. As a professor, you can school some people.
Right.
Why do some states have governors of the opposite party they always vote for president?
Why do some states what?
Why do some states have governors of the opposite party they always vote for president?
Oh, yeah. It's pretty rare. But what's happened in some states like Maryland and Massachusetts, you had Hogan in Maryland, Baker in Massachusetts, is you've had very, very moderate Republicans running against weak Democratic challengers. Note that both those guys are gone and Democrats have taken over Maryland and Massachusetts. So it's not a very common phenomenon, but Maryland and Massachusetts both, even though they're, perhaps the bluest states in the country, do have a history of electing moderate Republican governors, but almost never in recent years senators or members of Congress.
Is there a specific reason for that?
Yeah, I think when it comes to national political issues, voters are reluctant to go for any Republican. But the governor's job is a little bit different. It's not
trouble.
any Democrat in Ohio is in trouble. You know,
Yeah.
there's been a lot of talk about Ohio being a swing state. It hasn't been. It's been a pretty solid Republican state. But, you know, kind of a populist Democrat like Sherrod Brown has shown a lot of resilience in Ohio. He's obviously going to have a tough reelection, but I think he's in a better position, for example, than Tester in Montana.
Right. All right. I think with that, we'll wrap up. Do you have any final thoughts to say to the people? Let's hear it.
You know, we talked about why Trump's base never cracks, because they want their bully, and they don't really care whether he lies or sexually assaults women or whatever he does, even shooting someone on Fifth Avenue. In the next episode, we're going to talk about the role of information in the modern era as also explaining why Trump's base doesn't crack. Interesting.
Okay, well, stay tuned for that. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. This was actually a really good stream. We had we had a good viewer count. We had good questions.
They were all good. There wasn't a bad question in the group.
Yankees aren't doing so well. Let's talk about sports for a second. Yeah, he doesn't want to talk about it. All right. Thank you.
The worst freak injury in the history of the Yankees.
He's talking about Aaron Judge, if you're wondering.
Aaron Judge stubbing his toe.
Yeah.